In the gathering darkness of September 21st, 1996, a father's flashlight beam cut through the Montana night, illuminating every parent's worst nightmare. In the shallow waters near Cameron Bridge Fishing Access, just 200 feet from her abandoned truck, lay 15-year-old Danielle Houchins. Face down in 18 inches of murky water, her gray sweatshirt soaked through, her mother's gold elastic watch still circling her wrist, silent witnesses to the violence that had unfolded hours before. The peaceful fishing spot where locals had cast their lines for generations was now a crime scene. Dani's truck sat empty in the parking lot, her keys and water jugs scattered on a nearby trail like breadcrumbs leading to tragedy. But these clues only hinted at the horror beneath the surface. Mud forced deep into her lungs and stomach, bruises marking her neck, signs of sexual assault, and for mysterious hairs that would wait patiently for 28 years to tell their story. What turns a bright teenager's peaceful Saturday afternoon into a family's devastating loss? How does an honors student with dreams of becoming a biological engineer end up murdered at her favorite fishing spot? Why would authorities rush to label it an accidental drowning when evidence screamed otherwise? And most importantly, how could a killer walk free among them for almost 3 decades? This isn't just another cold case solved by modern science. This is a story of secrets buried as deep as the mud that claimed a young girl's final breath. It's about a sister's relentless quest for truth, a family's shattered trust in justice, and a killer who lived a double life until technology finally caught up with his past. This is the story of how a small Montana community discovered that sometimes the monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're walking among us, wearing badges of respect and trust.
The sheriff lied to my parents, bold-faced lied and betrayed the trust of shocked and grieving parents. Those institutions failed my sister, failed my family, and failed this community.
In the quiet town of Belgrade, Montana, where mountains touched the sky and rivers carved their paths through the valley, lived a bright young girl named Danielle Houchins. Everyone who knew her called her Dani, and her smile could light up even the darkest room. It was 1996, and at just 15 years old, Dani had already shown the world she was something special. Walking through the halls of Belgrade High School, Dani stood out not just for her kind heart, but for her brilliant mind. Her teachers would often find her staying after class, asking questions about science that went far beyond what most teenagers wondered about. You see, Dani had a dream. She wanted to become a biological engineer. While other kids her age were just trying to figure out what they wanted to do next weekend, Dani was planning how she would change the world. But Dani wasn't just about books and studying. If you visited the Houchins family home, you might find her playing tricks on her brother Jake or sharing secrets with her sister Stephanie. She was the kind of big sister that younger siblings dream of, having protective, fun, and always ready with a joke or a helping hand. The Montana wilderness was Dani's playground. On weekends, you might spot her hiking along rocky trails, her face glowing with excitement as she climbed higher and higher. She loved the feel of rough rocks under her hands while rock climbing, the splash of cold river water during rafting trips, and the whoosh of wind in her ears as she skied down snowy slopes. The outdoors was where Dani felt most alive. Her room was filled with the sounds of grunge and rock music, the latest CDs stacked carefully next to her study desk, where she worked hard enough to earn a spot in Who's Who among American high school students. This wasn't just any honor. It was proof that Dani was special, that she was going places. At home, Dani shared her life with her parents, Cheryl and Rex, who watched their daughter growing into an amazing young woman. They saw how she balanced being a normal teenager, one who loved music and joking around, with being an exceptional student who dreamed of making the world better through science. In the fall of 1996, Dani was a sophomore, her whole life stretching out before her like the endless Montana sky. She was that rare combination of smart and kind, serious about her future but always ready to laugh. Nobody could have known that this bright, beautiful life would soon be at the center of a mystery that would take nearly 3 decades to solve. This is where our story begins. Not just a story about a terrible crime, but a story about love, about never giving up, and about a sister's promise to find the truth, no matter how long it took. The morning of September 21st, 1996, started like many others in Belgrade, Montana. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves danced in the gentle breeze. But this ordinary Saturday would turn into a day that would haunt the Houchins family forever. That morning, tension filled the family home. Like many teenagers, Dani had gotten into a small argument with her parents, the kind that usually blows over by dinner time. Around noon, needing some space to clear her head, Dani grabbed the keys to her Chevy pickup truck. She told her mom she was heading to Cameron Bridge Fishing Access, a peaceful spot about 4 miles southwest of their home where the Gallatin River flowed quietly through the landscape. "Be back by 2, Cheryl," her mom called out. They were expecting company that afternoon, and everyone was supposed to be home for the gathering. Before Dani left, Cheryl did something she would remember for the rest of her life. She gave Dani her gold elastic watch to help her keep track of time. The truck's engine rumbled to life, and Dani pulled away from their house, her gray sweatshirt and blue jeans visible through the window. She was also wearing a knee brace, a reminder of a recent injury from dancing with friends the week before. Nobody knew this would be the last time they would see her alive. 2 o'clock came and went. No Dani. The guests started arriving, but the empty chair at the table spoke volumes. Worry began to creep into Cheryl's heart. This wasn't like Dani. She was responsible, always keeping her promises to be home on time. By late afternoon, with still no sign of her daughter, Cheryl couldn't wait any longer. She and a friend drove out to Cameron Bridge to look for Dani. What they found sent chills down their spines. Dani's truck was there, parked in the lot, but she was nowhere to be seen. On a trail next to the parking area, they spotted her keys and water jug lying on the path. The truck was unlocked, something Dani would never do, especially with her father's computer and her precious CDs inside. At 5 p.m., with hands shaking, Cheryl called the Gallatin County authorities. As she later told the police, when she saw those keys and the water jug on the ground, she felt a knot in her stomach. A mother's instinct told her something was terribly wrong. Cheryl did what any hopeful mother would do. She left a note on Dani's truck. "I have your keys," she wrote. "I've gone to get help. If you come back, stay here and wait for us." It was a message filled with desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, her daughter would return safely. As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, friends, family, and law enforcement spread out across the area. They called Dani's name until their voices grew hoarse. They knew what she was wearing, the gray sweatshirt, blue jeans, and knee brace. They knew she had to be close by. After all, her truck was right there. But where was she? The search continued as darkness approached, with flashlight beams cutting through the growing shadows. Nobody wanted to stop looking, but as night fell, the official search was called off until morning. However, those who loved Dani couldn't bear to give up, not while there was still a chance of finding her. As night wrapped its dark blanket around Cameron Bridge, some people refused to stop searching for Dani. Among them was one of Stephanie's good friends, whose father and uncle knew every inch of the fishing area like the back of their hands. They had grown up fishing these waters, and if anyone could find Dani in the darkness, it would be them. At about 9:30 that night, under the beam of a flashlight, the friend's father made the discovery that would change everything. About 200 feet from Dani's truck, in a marshy area near the Gallatin River, he found what everyone had been praying they wouldn't find: Dani's lifeless body, floating face down in about 1.5 feet of murky water. The scene was heartbreaking. The peaceful fishing spot, usually filled with the sounds of rushing water and birdsong, had become the site of an unthinkable tragedy. The area where they found her was swampy and rocky, overgrown with vegetation, a place where a young girl should never have ended up alone. In a moment that would haunt him forever, the friend's father was leaving to notify authorities when he came across another vehicle driving slowly through the darkness. It was Dani's father, Rex, making one last desperate search for his daughter. There, in the quiet of the Montana night, one father had to tell another the most devastating news any parent could hear. Back at the Houchins' home, hope still flickered like a candle in the wind. Cheryl, Dani's mother, was clinging to the belief that when daylight came, they would find her daughter. When Rex returned home, the weight of his grief visible in every step, Cheryl's world shattered. "I know they'll look again in the morning," she said, her voice trembling. "They're going to find her." But Rex had to deliver the crushing truth. "No, honey, they found her. She's gone." The news spread through Belgrade like wildfire. In this tight-knit Montana community where everyone knew everyone, the loss of such a bright young life sent shockwaves through the town. Friends, teachers, and neighbors struggled to understand how something so terrible could happen in their peaceful community. For Stephanie, Danny's sister, the news was like a physical blow. She would later say that from that moment on, not a single day would pass without thinking about her sister. The strong, smart, funny girl who had been her role model and best friend was gone, leaving behind a void that nothing could fill. News crews arrived, their cameras capturing the grim faces of law enforcement officers and the tears of community members. The peaceful fishing access, once a place of joy for so many, had become a crime scene, wrapped in yellow police tape that fluttered in the Montana breeze like terrible flags of mourning. The following days would bring more questions than answers, as investigators tried to piece together what had happened to Danny. But for now, in those first terrible hours, all anyone could do was grieve for the girl with the bright future, whose life had been cut tragically short on what should have been just another peaceful Saturday afternoon. In the days following Danny's death, something wasn't quite right in the way the case was being handled. While the community mourned and demanded answers, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Department, led by Sheriff Bill Slaughter, made an announcement that left many people scratching their heads in disbelief. They called it an undetermined death. Those two simple words would haunt Danny's family for decades to come. The medical examiner at the Montana State Crime Lab, after looking at Danny's body, focused on drowning as the cause of death. Even more surprisingly, they said they couldn't find any clear signs that someone had hurt her. There were no cuts or bruises, Sheriff Slaughter told reporters, his words echoing through the local news. This could have been an accidental drowning. To many people who knew Danny, especially those who understood her outdoor skills, this made no sense at all. How could a healthy, strong teenager who loved the outdoors just accidentally drown in shallow water? One young deputy named Keith Farquhar couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with this conclusion. He took it upon himself to talk to Danny's doctor, who told him something important. There was nothing wrong with Danny that would have stopped her from simply rolling over if she had fallen in such shallow water. But when Farquhar tried to tell this to his bosses, they didn't want to hear it. "What does a doctor know?" the sheriff supposedly said, dismissing Farquhar's concerns. This response bothered the young deputy so much that he never forgot it. The whole situation troubled him so deeply that just 3 months after Danny's death, he quit his job at the sheriff's office. Behind the scenes, there was even more going on that the public didn't know about. The investigators had found evidence that told a different story, evidence that wouldn't come to light for many years. They had discovered signs of a violent attack, but for some reason, they kept this information from Danny's grieving family. The Houchins family was told to accept that maybe their daughter had just had a terrible accident. They were even told that she might have fallen because of her knee brace. To anyone who knew Danny, a girl who could climb mountains and navigate river rapids, this explanation felt like a slap in the face. Meanwhile, important evidence sat in storage at the Montana State Crime Lab. Crucial DNA evidence that could have helped solve the case wasn't properly processed. Sometimes evidence was even lost or misfiled. The watch that Cheryl had given Danny that morning, a potential piece of evidence, disappeared somewhere in the system. For Danny's sister Stephanie, watching all of this unfold was like living in a nightmare. She could see that something wasn't right, but every time she or her family tried to get answers, they hit a wall of silence or were told to accept the official explanation. The community was left wondering, was there a killer walking free among them? Had justice been pushed aside? And most importantly, would anyone ever really try to find out what happened to Danny that Saturday afternoon at Cameron Bridge? Years would pass before the truth about what really happened to Danny started coming to light. And when it did, it was like opening a door to a dark room that nobody wanted to look inside. The evidence that had been hidden from the Houchins family was devastating. When Stephanie finally got to look at her sister's case files, what she discovered made her stomach turn. The peaceful drowning story they'd been told was far from the truth. There, in black and white, were the details that painted a picture of violence that no family should ever have to read about their child. The medical examiner had found mud, not just in Dani's lungs, but deep in her stomach. This wasn't someone who had accidentally slipped under the water. This was someone who had been forcefully held down, struggling for breath as mud and water filled her airways. Dark bruises on the back of her neck told the story of strong hands holding her under. Her mother's gold elastic watch, which Cheryl had given her that morning, had been pulled roughly over her hand. One of her sandals had fallen off and was found nearby, suggesting a struggle. Her clothes told their own silent story. Her bra had been rolled up under her shirt, a detail that spoke of violence no one had told the family about. Most shocking of all, there were 4 hairs found on Dani's body that didn't belong to her. These hairs, which would later become crucial to solving the case, were quietly stored away in evidence. There was also DNA evidence that proved she had been sexually assaulted, a truth that had been kept from her parents for years. Instead of being told these brutal facts, the Houchins family had been given a different story. They were told there were no marks on their daughter's body. They were even told, in what would later prove to be a cruel lie, that Dani had died without being harmed in any other way. The sheriff's office had looked her parents in the eyes and told them their daughter's death might have been an accident. The detective team had put all this evidence in front of their leaders, the sheriff, the coroner, and the medical examiner. Yet somehow, inexplicably, they still didn't rule Dani's death a homicide. It was as if someone had decided that the truth was too complicated, too difficult to deal with, and so they buried it under paperwork and silence. The Montana State Crime Lab had failed the family too. Not only had they lost crucial evidence like Dani's watch, but they had also misfiled the very evidence that would eventually help solve the case. It was like pieces of a puzzle being scattered to the wind, making it harder and harder to ever put the whole picture together. For Stephanie, discovering these hidden truths was like losing her sister all over again. Each new revelation brought fresh waves of grief and anger. How many nights had her family spent wondering, when the answers were sitting in files all along? How many years had they lived with a sanitized version of their daughter's death while the real story gathered dust in evidence lockers? Time moved slowly in Belgrade after Dani's death. Days turned into months, months into years, but for the Houchins family, especially Stephanie, it felt like time had stopped on that September day in 1996. For 23 long years, each sunrise brought the same questions, the same pain, and the same determination to find answers. Picture a young girl growing into a woman, carrying a weight that most people couldn't imagine. That was Stephanie. While others moved on with their lives, she kept a promise to her sister. A promise whispered in the dark hours of night. "Dani, I will find out what happened to you." She would often wake up at 3 a.m., her heart racing, saying out loud, "Dani, I got you. I won't let them forget." During those years, Stephanie became a familiar voice at the sheriff's office. Her calls and emails became so regular that the office staff knew her by name. "Any updates on my sister's case?" she would ask, hoping that today might be different from yesterday. But the answer was always the same: nothing new to report. The Montana State Crime Lab tried testing the evidence several times over the years, but each attempt ended in frustration. The DNA testing technology of the 1990s and early 2000s wasn't advanced enough to get useful results from the small samples they had. Each failed test felt like another door closing. In the community, people whispered. Some remembered Dani as the bright teenager who died too young. Others wondered if there was a killer walking free among them. Parents held their children a little closer, and teenagers became more careful about going places alone. The case files gathered dust on shelves, occasionally pulled out when a new detective showed interest, only to be filed away again when leads went nowhere. But while the official investigation might have slowed to a crawl, Stephanie never stopped. She read everything she could about similar cases, learned about new investigation techniques, and kept pushing for anyone who would listen to take another look. There were a few investigators who did take the case seriously. One was Cindy BK, who worked on it from 2006 to 2016. She believed there was more to the story than an accidental drowning, but even she couldn't break through the walls of silence and missing evidence that surrounded the case. The hardest part for the family wasn't just the waiting. It was watching the world change around them while their own lives seemed frozen in time. They saw new technologies develop, watched other cold cases get solved, and wondered why their Danny's case couldn't be one of them. Every time they heard about another case being solved through DNA testing or new investigative techniques, it gave them hope, only to face disappointment when nothing happened with Danny's case. Through it all, Stephanie kept her sister's memory alive. She talked about Danny to anyone who would listen, about her dreams of becoming a biological engineer, her love of the outdoors, her kindness, her humor. She wouldn't let her sister become just another cold case number in a filing cabinet. Everything changed in 2019. Like a key finally finding its lock, things started to shift when Stephanie heard about something amazing. The Golden State Killer had been caught using a new technique called genetic genealogy. This news lit a fire in her heart. If they could catch a killer after 40 years, why not find who hurt Danny? With renewed energy, Stephanie started calling the sheriff's office again. But this time something was different. A detective named Matt Boxmeer had been quietly looking into Danny's case for years. When he saw how many times Stephanie had called, he decided it was time to call her back. 6 months later, the news Stephanie had waited 23 years to hear finally came. They were officially reopening Danny's case. The new sheriff, Dan Springer, brought fresh eyes and a fresh promise. He had a personal connection to the case. He'd been a rookie deputy just 5 days into the job when Danny was found. Now, as sheriff, he could make things right. "I am making a promise," he told Stephanie, looking her straight in the eyes. "We will find an answer to this case." In 2021, something incredible happened. After all these years, Stephanie was finally allowed to sit down and look through her sister's case files. As she turned each page, she discovered truths that had been hidden from her family for decades. It was like reading a horrible story she never wanted to know, but had to understand. The team working the case now was different from before. They weren't interested in quick answers or easy explanations. They sent evidence to a special lab called Azria Forensics in California. This wasn't just any lab. It was a place where scientists could get DNA from samples that other labs couldn't work with, like the hairs found on Danny's body. By 2023, the case had finally been officially declared what Stephanie had known all along: a homicide. The evidence was clear now. They found DNA that proved Danny had been attacked. Those hairs that had been collected back in 1996 weren't just random evidence anymore. They were finally going to tell their story. A team of dedicated investigators came together. There was Sheriff Springer, who had promised justice. There was retired Los Angeles Police Department Captain Thomas Elfmont, who had moved to Bozeman and couldn't resist helping with one more case. And there was Sergeant Court Dew, who specialized in solving crimes using DNA technology. They began to piece together the puzzle, using modern science to read clues that had waited silently for decades. The evidence that had been ignored or mishandled in 1996 was finally getting the attention it deserved. Every small detail was examined with care and respect, treating Danny's case with the importance it should have had from the beginning. In May 2024, a phone call changed everything. C.C. Moore, a genetic genealogist who had helped solve hundreds of cold cases, was on the line with the detectives. After months of careful work, tracing DNA through family trees and generations of connections, she had found him, Danny's killer. Like putting together pieces of an intricate puzzle, Moore had worked backward through time. She found the suspect's great-grandparents on both sides of his family tree. At first, it seemed like a dead end. All the family connections led to New Hampshire, thousands of miles from Montana. But then, on a Facebook page, she found a crucial post. One of the family members had moved to Bozeman on July 1st, 1996, just months before Danny was killed. His name was Paul Hutchinson. He was 55 years old, married for 24 years with 2 grown children. To the outside world, he seemed normal, even respected. He worked as a fisheries biologist for the Bureau of Land Management in Dillon, Montana. He was an outdoorsman who loved hunting and fishing, someone people trusted and admired. The truth hit especially hard for some people in the community. Rel, who had been Stephanie's childhood friend, knew Hutchinson well. He had been her mentor in the early 2000s, teaching her about hunting and fishing. He was just so utterly unremarkable. She would later say, struggling to understand how someone she trusted could have hidden such a dark secret. When investigators looked deeper into Hutchinson's past, the pieces started fitting together. In September 1996, he had just moved to Bozeman to study at Montana State University. His work-study job put him right on the waterways around Belgrade, including the area where Danny was found. He had known every bend in that river, every hidden spot along its banks. On July 23, 2024, Thomas Elfmont and Sergeant Cordew went to confront Hutchinson at his workplace. The day was scorching hot 98 degrees, and Hutchinson invited them inside a small conference room. As soon as they started talking, the investigators noticed something was wrong. Hutchinson began sweating profusely, biting his nails, scratching his face. When they showed him Danny's photo, he slumped in his chair, trying to distance himself as far as possible from the image. His reaction told them everything they needed to know. Throughout the interview, he denied any involvement, but his body language screamed the truth his lips wouldn't speak. After they let him go, Hutchinson drove erratically through town, as if trying to shake an invisible tail. The investigators had surveillance on him, watching his every move. They knew they needed his DNA to make a final match, but they wouldn't get the chance to collect it, at least not the way they planned. At 4:17 the next morning, in the dark hours before dawn, Paul Hutchinson made his last phone call. He contacted the Beaverhead County Sheriff's Office, his voice calm as he said he needed help with his vehicle. He gave them a location on the side of the road west of Dillon, then hung up. Minutes later, when deputies arrived at the spot, they found what Hutchinson had planned all along. He had taken his own life with a .38 caliber Derringer pistol. His final act was one of cowardice, denying Danny's family the justice they had waited nearly 3 decades to see in a courtroom. The investigators moved quickly to collect DNA from Hutchinson's body. When they compared it to the evidence from Danny's case, there was no doubt it was a perfect match. Sheriff Springer announced it was 100% confirmation that they had found their killer. The hair that had waited patiently for 28 years had finally spoken its truth. For Stephanie, the news brought mixed emotions. She had spent years imagining the moment she would face her sister's killer in court. "I was preparing myself for the next 3 to 5 years of a court battle," she said, "to staring him down, to being present every day in that courtroom. Now that chance was gone forever." The news hit the community like a thunderclap. People who had known Hutchinson, worked with him, trusted him, couldn't believe what they were hearing. His wife wrote a heartbreaking statement. "We are absolutely heartbroken to learn this news. In 24 years of marriage, there was never any hint that something like this could be lurking in the background." Paul was an exceptional husband and father. On August 8, 2024, the sheriff's office held a press conference. Sheriff Springer stood before the cameras and declared, "This case exemplifies our relentless pursuit of justice. We never gave up on finding the truth for Danny and her family, but it was Stephanie's turn at the microphone that everyone would remember. She stood there, strong and determined, and finally spoke the truth that had been hidden for so long. She talked about the mud in her sister's lungs, the bruises that proved she had fought back, the evidence that had been ignored or hidden. Her words weren't just about the past. They were a demand for change, a call to make sure no other family would have to wait 28 years for answers. The effects of the case reached far beyond just finding Danny's killer. Questions arose about other possible victims. Could someone commit such a terrible crime and then never do it again in 28 years? The investigators began looking into other unsolved cases, wondering if Hutchinson's DNA might match other crimes.